I rise tonight to speak about the conflict in Afghanistan from really one perspective, that is of those who have given their lives in the service of our country. And I do so knowing that we have a lot of work to do this year to debate and discuss and spend a good deal of time this year talking about the policy, what's happening in Afghanistan, whether it's our policy as it relates to security or governance or development. But tonight I just want to focus on those who gave, as Lincoln said, the last full measure of devotion to their country. And I guess at times like this we have to ask maybe one threshold question, and it's, for me, it's this question: how do we adequately pay tribute to our fighting men and women serving in Afghanistan or anywhere around the world? And I guess the other part of that question is, how do we adequately express our gratitude for those who are serving, those who served and came back with no injury, and were able to get back to some semblance of a normal life, those who served and came back but are suffering grievously from an injury, and finally, how do we adequately express our gratitude to those who were killed in action and express gratitude to their families as well? The answer to all of those questions, I think, is we cannot adequately express our gratitude. But even though it's inadequate, even though it falls short of what we hope it could be, we still have to thank them. We still have to and should express our gratitude. So I do so tonight with a healthy dose of humility and a recognition that it's very difficult to adequately express our gratitude. We're a nation at war, and as we pay tribute to the troops who are fighting for us, we should also never forget the sacrifices of their families, the families that support those fighting men and women, and of course, by extension, support all of us. An enormous sacrifice when a loved one goes overseas, even if, as I said before, even if they serve and come back and they're okay at the end of that service. Just the time away, the things they miss in their family's life, month after month, year after year. They miss family celebrations, birthdays and weddings, and literally the birth of a child is sometimes missed because of their deployment. And that's in nowhere near an exhaustive list. So we do want to pay tribute in a very personal way to the families as well. Sometimes when we talk about our troops and I talk about our country, we search for language and stories and meaning. We look to the scriptures. We, as I've often done, quote Abraham Lincoln. We can also look to some of our more modern and current artists, and there are plenty of them we could cite. I was thinking a lot about some words from the great recording artist Bruce Springsteen. He wrote a series of songs that connected to, or I should say were inspired by the horrific events of 9/11. And most of the songs on that, what we used to call an album, the Rising, were connected to the events of 9/11. But he wrote one song which I think has, the words have direct, and the theme of the song I think has direct application to folks who are serving our country and who are in fact missing from their families. There's a repetition of some lines in that song where he says, "You're missing." At one point the song goes like this. He says, "You're missing when I shut out the lights, you're missing. When I close my eyes, you're missing." And he finally says, "When I see the sunrise, you're missing." And I always thought that made a lot of sense to me in terms of trying as best I can to understand what our families are going through when a loved one is deployed. That family is missing that service, that family member when they're serving in Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere around the world. Of course, it's especially meaningful and poignant and sad and moving when it means you're missing because you've been killed in action. And every day they're missing when someone is turning out the lights at night, when they're sleeping, and when they see the sunrise in the morning. So we think of those words and the fact that there are a lot of people missing today from their family because of their deployment or because of their death. I've read the names of those who were killed in action in Iraq over time in 2007 and 2008 and 2009, we got through that list of those who had lost their lives in Iraq. In that conflict to date, 197 Pennsylvanians lost their lives. And as we remember those who were killed in action from, in this case I'll be referring to the Pennsylvanians, we also must remember the wounded warriors who have returned from the battlefield. In Pennsylvania, that's to date 398 brave men and women have been wounded in this war, the war in Afghanistan. Last week I met two courageous young men, Army Corporal Russell Carter of Springfield, Pennsylvania, Delaware County, right outside of the city of Philadelphia, and Marine Corporal David Noblet of Herndon, Pennsylvania. That's in Northumberland County in the middle of our state. They had just returned from Afghanistan, both wounded, and just remarkably strong and capable soldiers fighting for us. Not a word, and the presiding officer knows from the soldiers he's spoken to, not a word of complaint about what happened to them, not a word of complaint about their care, and they're getting great care at Walter Reed. And I salute, obviously, their bravery and their valor, but we also, of course, salute the sacrifice of their families at this time, and commend the efforts of the staff at Walter Reed who take care of them. Remarkable, almost miraculous care and treatment of our soldiers. They work every day to make sure that those soldiers not only are cared for and that they're progressing, but that in fact, because of that care and because of that dedicated care at so many facilities, whether it's Walter Reed or veterans hospitals or whatever across the country, one of the reasons they do that is to ensure that the future choices of these young service members are not determined by an IED blast or by the bullet from a sniper. That because of the rehabilitation, because of the healing and hope that comes from that work, that soldier's future is determined and will be determined by that soldier and not by the enemy. The rehabilitation work done at Walter Reed is just remarkable, and we are reminded when we see these soldiers in that care of their strength. We're reminded of their skills, the dignity that comes as a result of that care and treatment over time, and that in fact they will determine their own future because of that care. So what I'll do now, just for the next couple of moments, next couple of minutes, is I'll read the names of Pennsylvanians who have been killed in action in Afghanistan in Operation Enduring Freedom. And I'll do so in alphabetical order and read their hometown, but the alphabetical order, of course, will be based upon the last name of the soldier. So I'll start with someone actually from my home county, Sergeant Jan Arganish of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Sergeant First Class Scott Ball of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Berrettini of Wilcox, Pennsylvania. Captain David Boris of Pottsville, Pennsylvania. Private Matthew Brown of Zelienople, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Douglas Bull of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Joseph Caskey of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. First Lieutenant Jeffrey DePrimo of Pittston, Pennsylvania. Private First Class James Dillon, Jr. of Grove City, Pennsylvania. Private First Class Michael Dinterman of Littlestown, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant Troy Ezernak of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Lance Corporal Ralph Fabry of Gallitzin, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Louis Fastuca of Westchester, Pennsylvania. Sergeant First Class Robert Fike of Conneautville, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant Sean Flannery of Wyomissing, Pennsylvania. Sergeant James Fordyce of Newtown Square, Pennsylvania. Petty Officer 3 John Fralish of New Kensington, Pennsylvania. Lance Corporal Michael Freeman of Fayetteville, Pennsylvania. Airman First Class Austin Gates Benson of Hellertown, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Christopher Geiger of Northampton, Pennsylvania. Second Lieutenant Michael Giordano of Apollo, Pennsylvania. Corporal Joshua Harton of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Michael Heed, Jr. of Delta, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Brett Hershey of State College, Pennsylvania. Specialist Derek Holland of Wind Gap, Pennsylvania. Sergeant First Class Brian Hoover of West Elizabeth, Pennsylvania. Lance Corporal Abram Howard of Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant Matthew Ingham of Altoona, Pennsylvania. Private First Class David Jefferson of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Lance Corporal Larry Johnson of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Nathan Kennedy of Claysville, Pennsylvania. Corporal Jared King of Erie, Pennsylvania. Specialist Dale Cridlow of Hughstown, Pennsylvania. Private First Class Serge Kraupaw of Hawley, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant Patrick Kuchbach, Staff Sergeant Patrick Kuchbach of McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Ryan Lane of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Master Sergeant Arthur Lilly of Smithfield, Pennsylvania. Captain Ronald Luce, Jr. of Wayne, Pennsylvania. Specialist Jonathan Lusher of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Master Sergeant Thomas Mahalik of Bradford, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Jonathan McCauley of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Andrew McConnell of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. First Sergeant Christopher Raftery of Brownsville, Pennsylvania. First Sergeant Christopher Rafferty of Brownsville, Pennsylvania. Specialist Jesse Reed of Orfield, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Joshua Reimer of Rochester, Pennsylvania. Gunnery Sergeant Justin Schmalstig of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Derek Shanfield of Hastings, Pennsylvania. Sergeant First Class Michael Shannon of Canadensis, Pennsylvania. Chief Warrant Officer 4 Michael Slobodnik of Gibsonia, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant Mark Small of Collegeville, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant Glenn Stuyvesant of Blairsville, Pennsylvania. Corporal Sasha Struble of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Private First Class Brandon Steyer of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant Paul Sweeney of Lakeville, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant Richard Tiemann of Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. Corporal Eric Torbert, Jr. of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Lance Corporal Joshua Twigg of Indiana, Pennsylvania. Specialist Anthony Vargas of Reading, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant William Vile of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Sergeant David Wallace III of Sharpsville, Pennsylvania. Sergeant Jonathan Walls of West Lawn, Pennsylvania. Staff Sergeant David Weigel of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Captain Brian Willard of Hummelstown, Pennsylvania. And finally, Corporal Anthony Williams of Oxford, Pennsylvania. Those are the names of those Pennsylvanians who have been killed in action in Afghanistan. We now have a total of 64 brave service members from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania who, as I said before, quoting Lincoln, gave the last full measure of devotion to their country. 27 of these young men came from towns with less than 5,000 people. You notice in that list some came from big cities like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and other big cities like Erie and Allentown. But 27 of the 64 came from very small communities where the death of one soldier in a town of 5,000 or less has a seismic impact on that town, a searing impact, first and foremost on that soldier's family and on their relatives and loved ones, but obviously even on the community itself. So all we can do at times like this, when it comes to paying tribute, is to do our best to convey a sense of gratitude, a sense of respect, and also to commit ourselves not only to helping the living, to help those who come after them, who have been wounded, their family and others. Lincoln also talked about him who has borne the battle and talked about those who have been wounded and their families. But all we can do for those who have been killed is to do as best we can to help their families and to pay tribute to their service and their memory, but also to make sure we're doing everything possible to get this policy right, to make sure that their sacrifice or that our policy, I should say, is commensurate with their sacrifice. So in one sense, we, as my father said a long time ago, in reference to the Gulf War of 1991, he said, we pray for them who serve. We pray for them and we pray for ourselves that we may be worthy of their valor. So tonight we do that, not only for those killed in action that I've read from Pennsylvania, but for those who have lost their lives from states across the country, including the state of Colorado that our presiding officer represents. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.